Hello everyone. Today I wanted to do a brief analysis on some of the comments made by a Mr. Bernard Schiff on Dr. Jordan Peterson. Now, he just recently wrote an article for The Star there, basically pointing out how Dr. Peterson might be quite dangerous and potentially, especially because he's probably political ambitious, and at one point or another in the future you might see him get into politics for the Conservative Party. So I guess this is his attempt to sink any political run before it even gets started. So now, Dr. Peterson, if you've been following him at all on Twitter and all, you've noticed that as of late there are a lot of articles, a lot of hit pieces running on him. And to tell you the truth, I mean, I've read the one from the New York Times just because it is the New York Times, right? Such a big publication. I mean, you know, a lot of other people are going to be reading it, so you want to know kind of like what the mood is around Dr. Peterson for them. For the other ones, I mean, I read a little bit here and there. My first video was on an article by The Forward, and the gist I get is they're really deliberately trying to misrepresent Dr. Peterson so that they can tank his whole ideas, so I don't really pay much attention to it. But this particular article is quite interesting because basically Mr. Schiff here was apparently Dr. Peterson's boss, and they've been friends. I kind of get, I think 20 years it says in this article at one point. So he's got very intimate knowledge about Dr. Peterson, and some of his points, you know, I'm not quite as alarmist as Dr. Schiff, obviously, but some of the comments and basically arguments that he makes, I also agree with some of the criticism. So I just highlighted a few quotes that I want to go over with quickly as something to keep in mind going forward. So let's jump right into it and go with the first one. And this basically is just affirming that Dr. Schiff believes Dr. Peterson is politically ambitious, and he was actually thinking of running for the federal Conservative Party when they were having their leadership race. So quite honestly, I'm glad he didn't. I do hope eventually that Dr. Peterson gets into politics, but right now I think it's a little bit too soon. I think it will be wise for him to grow out his base a little bit further and quite honestly give his supporters a few years to become educated in a lot of the things he's talking about and other things. That way, if he does eventually get into politics, they'll be able to really help out his campaign by spreading his message in the various communities or whatnot. And to tell you the truth, I mean, yeah, I'm quite, I will give it like 5 years. I mean, Dr. Peterson is 55 years old. I mean, depending on what his health is, it seems like people are saying that he's healthy. So yeah, I'd wait a little bit longer before he does that. But I think it's quite interesting nonetheless. So let's hope, let's keep in mind, let's see how it develops going forward. But I think that's very interesting. So let's look at the second quote here. The second quote here is, and Mr. Schiff will do it a few times in this article here, is allude to the fact that, you know, has Dr. Peterson seems to have some idiosyncrasies in particular to like religious belief. Like he almost sees himself as like a prophet and his followers as like, you know, children that like his flock that he needs to tend and watch over with. I mean, if you read 12 Rules for Life, right, in his introduction there, he talks, I mean, he has this weird passage where he talks about as having a dream where he's hanging from a chandelier in a cathedral. And of course he points to the fact that the cathedral a lot of times is built kind of like to approximate a cross. Like the main dome in the center is the center of the cross, then there's two little domes, left and right, that represent the cross-sectional beam, and then the long hallway makes the whole cathedral looks like a cross. So if he's hanging from the top, it's like he's at the center of the cross, you know, kind of like a Jesus figure, right? So, you know, I don't quite know what to make out of all of that. I mean, that's his particular thing. I mean, I don't know what happens to a person if you spend like 20 years studying the Bible every day and trying to draw meaning from it. Maybe you do start having religious dreams, you know. I don't know what to make of that, but I mean, the fact that he wanted at one point was thinking about buying a church and doing sermons every Sunday and then make a political run. I mean, those are two weird things, right? I mean, and basically, I think we all kind of know that. I mean, there are tendencies. I mean, it's almost like beginning like a cult. He's almost becoming like a cult figure to a lot of his fans. And so, that worries me because, when somebody gets into politics, I mean, I like Dr. Peterson. I think he has incredible ideas, but, if he were to go politics, I mean, he's cool and all, but do I really want him running my life? I mean, does that, just because he has genuine good ideas, does that give him the right to take my money and spend it as he sees fit or not? And plus, there's two issues to consider because Dr. Peterson's message is, a lot of times he's bashing ideologues, and chastising people for not thinking for themselves, and at the same time, his supporters a lot of the times, it's kind of getting to the point where they just believe everything Dr. Peterson says and just repeat his message ad nauseum without potentially thinking for themselves. So those two forces are kind of contrasting each other. So, I don't know what to make of this thing. I keep it on the back of my mind, but, I think it will be best for him to ease up a little bit on the religious allegory, especially of himself. I don't know. I don't know how smart it is for him going forward. So anyway, I think this criticism is valid and just something to keep in mind going forward. So point number 2, he's basically saying that Dr. Peterson is a little eccentric. I mean, at one point, I guess he was suffering from depression and whatnot. But, I noticed that too, where like, you can tell that at some points in some debates, there's like a deep anger, like that he just has to contain right at the bottom. He's like really trying not to lash out at people. And, I don't know what to make out of that. I think at some points he takes himself a little too seriously. But then again, he's facing a lot of smear campaigns as of late, and who knows? I mean, this is a man that toiled in anonymity for a long time, right? I mean, he's saying that for maps of meaning, he had to work for 3 hours every day for something like 15 years, right? So he puts in all this work to create this amazing theory, and people try to discredit him with a few lines, trying to completely misrepresent his work, So I can see where that anger might come from, but I think going forward, I mean, I think he really has to watch out to kind of quell those emotions and those perceptions of him. So that's also something else to keep in mind. And then the third point here, it's this quote, basically how Dr. Schiff is saying, basically he reads the student reviews for Dr. Peterson, because I guess he was his boss, and he was saying how one student pointed out that he did not like delivered truths. And this is also a criticism I have of Dr. Peterson. His writing is not sometimes always clear, and myself, I prefer very much a very structured argument with deductive logic. Like I start out with a few maxims that builds out my foundation, and then you build your whole structure of knowledge from there. As Dr. Peterson, I mean, he's just his theory is really eclectic, right? So he'll pull out from a lot of different fields: religion, psychoanalysis, biology. Sociology, traditions, storytelling, I mean, symbolism. So he pulls out from so many different things. Sometimes you feel like you're not getting a really solid structure to his theories. Like, for example, I'm going through my second reading of 12 Rules for Life. So basically, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of theories, right? So if you're thinking about reading it, I would say just do a first reading, really quickly, just get through it, and then read it again with a notebook and take notes and really take time to learn it, because it's got a lot of complex theories. So like I said, I was reading this section where basically he was recommending that to find meaning in life, a person has to be grounded both in order and chaos. So you have to have a certain structure to your life, and then you have to allow a certain chaos, the unknown, and confront it, so that way you're learning. So basically he looks at the world we mostly live in order, right? But if you want to grow and you want to learn, you have to venture into the chaos, and that way you can add to the general body of knowledge, right? And I read something like that, and I'm like, It's very interesting. It seems to resonate with me. It seems to be true, but like, how do you know that? How do you know that that is what gives meaning to your life and whatnot? I mean, it makes sense because then that gives a certain meaning that helps alleviate the suffering of being and whatnot. So I think that's where he's going with. But I'm not sure that's really true. But the way he gets to that is amazing. So he starts talking about like the right and left hemisphere of the brain, and how the right one is basically that is like our creative center, and the left one is where we have language, structure, logic, and all those other things. So he uses that, like the right hemisphere represents like chaos, the left hemisphere represents order, and our brain developed that from natural selection, from a Darwinist argument, because that's how the world is in a metaphysical view outside, and so our brain had to develop these two hemispheres so that we could survive. And I think that's an incredible theory when you really think about it. And to go even further, I mean, that's where you get like you could say you get gender differences, right? So maybe like, I'm not sure if it's actually a gender difference, but females tend to be more creative, so they're more right side dominated, while males are more left side. And anyway, definitely know that some people, I'm not sure about the biology thing, but I know definitely some people are more right hemisphere, some are more left, and then there's a couple of few of us that can use both of them. And I mean, if you can use both of them, I mean, let's face it, I mean, Dr. Peterson is right in that you need the right hemisphere, you need chaos to venture into the unknown and try and bring order to the chaos, and that is how we push humanity forward towards progress and like scientific discovery and something. Like particularly Einstein, he wasn't too good with mathematics actually. It was his ability to sit down and do creative thought experiments in his head. It was creativity that allowed him to do the work that he did, right? But anyway, like, and he goes much further into it, talking about order and chaos. He'll go back to like evolutionary psychology, talking about how does he do it? Yeah, basically like, a lot of people are, I read this more than once, that basically our brain developed from our need to socialize with one another. Like humans are the dominant species because of the way we're able to cooperate with one another. I mean, this laptop here that is in front of me, there's no one human that can build this laptop from scratch, right? Yeah, maybe somebody can put all the components together, but I doubt there's even one human being that knows how to make all the components that go into this laptop, right? To do so, it's an incredible body of knowledge. So how do we build the laptop? Well, we cooperate with one another. I'll build this little component, you build that component, you build the machinery that mines the materials that we use to build the component with. So working together, we build the laptops and everything we see around, right? So basically, and to develop this cooperation, so our brain started growing larger. So our first perceptions were of personalities and how to read body language and how to, and so we started to realize, well, females have this certain characteristics, men have this certain characteristics, and we started developing emotions to sort of tell us the different perceptions and the different body language, and interpret the actions of people in the troops and the tribe. So, and then once we started doing that, we started looking into the unknown, because we developed spare brain capacity, and then to make sense of the unknown, we started ascribing these personality perceptions to the outside, and so we gave the chaos the feminine, and we gave the order the masculine. So you see what I mean? Like it's a very interesting theory altogether, but like and it seems to make sense. And obviously I'll have to read that section again, probably to try and internalize it and make real sense of it. But I think it's the truth. It seems to be the truth, but it's not really grounded as solid as I would like it to be. And so this criticism about delivered truth seems valid. But how Dr. Peterson would challenge it, and I know how he would do it, is essentially he's a pragmatist, right? So like in this quote, basically the professor's saying, excellent. He had excellent reviews and included eyebrow-raising comments such as, "This course has changed my life." So Dr. Peterson, being a pragmatist, he's like, well, like my theories, what I'm teaching makes sense to people. It resonates with them. And pragmatism basically says if a theory is useful and it works, then it's the truth. So again, I'm not I get where pragmatism is coming from. I'm not a real pragmatist per se in trying to develop my body of knowledge, but if you are a pragmatist, then Dr. Peterson is probably correct. Hey, my stuff is resonating. Look how many people I'm getting. People are telling me I'm changing their life. So what I'm saying is the truth, right? Where I would say, I don't know about that, but so again, that's something to keep in mind going forward anyway. Next comment. Okay, so this is another comment. You can pause the video if you want to read it, but the other thing that I picked up during my first reading of 12 Rules for Life is that Dr. Peterson, to me, seems to be like a firm traditionalist, right? He's basically like, his whole theory seems to be that the world, like, the world should be balanced by order and chaos, and like he draws a lot to the Taoist symbol of the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, and the proper way to live is to navigate that dividing line in the middle, to be perfectly in the middle, 1 foot planted in the order, 1 foot planted in the chaos. And if you do that, that's how you're going to find meaning in your life. That's how you're going to transcend the suffering of being and achieve immortality. And then he goes into like the whole religious allegory, which I think might be taking it a bit too far, but anyway. So basically what he basically thinks that right now society is not in balance, that the Marxists and the postmodernists and whatnot are bringing too much chaos and trying to tear down the institutions, and that's why he's on Bill 16 in particular, because he believes that they're attacking a vital block in gender and the nuclear family potentially, so that's why he's getting all riled up, right? I can understand genders, I think you're right, that is a vital building block, but I get the feeling he defends a lot of other institutions that I wouldn't particularly agree with. So he is pretty strict about gender roles. He has said some things that I'm not so sure about those. So anyway, this is just something to keep in mind, that he probably is most likely a traditionalist, where I come from like a more revolutionary type of outlook. If anything, I believe we have too much order in sort of the wrong places, and so I would like to see some chaos injected into it. But anyway, that's just my point of view. It's just something to keep in mind that Dr. Peterson is essentially a traditionalist. This is a fair criticism, I would say. So looking at another quote here. So this is kind of following what I was saying about the traditionalist, right? So the thing about Bill 16 to me wasn't really a free speech issue, is that Dr. Peterson fundamentally believes that gender does not differentiate from your biology, and so he sees it as a threat when people are trying to say that gender is not the same thing as what your biology is made up of, depending in terms of chromosomes and whatnot. So basically he sees Bill 16 as like an attempt, hey, I want to be able to speak about these things because I think they have fundamental implications on the building blocks of society, the tradition, the order that is so necessary to achieve that balance, to walk the middle path. And you're going towards the direction of making it a hate crime. And this guy's basically saying, hey, this isn't a free speech issue. You are fundamentally opposed to some of the science here. So this is basically, which I think he's correct. I think that's what Dr. Peterson is really focused on, but he didn't want to get into the debate of gender in particular, so he turned it a free speech issue, which I'm not sure, why he would do that. I'm not sure why, again, I think he was trying to simplify the issue, but again, I think this is a fair criticism. But so this is basically where the disagreement between the two stems on, is that apparently Mr. Schiff here has a transgender daughter, and he wants to be able to say that gender is separate from biology. And I haven't read any scientific paper on any of this. I had the feeling that a lot of this can be a mental health issue, and in the sense that some people have gone trans and then they wanted to reverse it because they didn't think trans was what it was. So again, I don't want to, this isn't a thing, you know, I don't know anything about it, but I'm not trying to say that, you know, you can like electrocute the gay out of someone, but like this is a thing where like if somebody, you know, is a man and they think they want to be a woman, that maybe through therapy you could change it and make them realize, hey, you know, you are a man and you're not going to find any happiness if you go through sex change surgery and whatnot. And I think we need to be able to have discussions about that. But if you make it a hate crime for me to not use the proper pronoun, then we can't talk about it, and then, you know, that person, you know, might end up being victimized, and you know, you can't really help in the proper way. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling on. I've been going on for a long time now, so I'm just going to end it here. Below I'm going to leave a link to my blog, a link to my Twitter. If you have any comments about anything I said, do you think there's any truth in the criticisms that Mr. Schiff pointed out? Do you think I'm correct in how I'm interpreting it and whatnot? I'd love to hear your comments. Anyway, I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.